I'm a total Simpsons fan, much like everyone else. I like the newer seasons, but I don't mind watching the classics. I don't think I've ever watched a fan edit before, though I think I don't want to watch any after the experience I had. It started on a nice summer afternoon. I was watching Lisa Goes Gaga. Lady Gaga is epic! Until I noticed, out of my peripheral vision, that the mailman had arrived and put something in my mailbox, as usual, and left. I paused my show to go see what I got in the mail. The only thing in the mailbox was a CD case for computers and a note. I took it inside. I looked at the note first and realized it was from my dear friend Paul, let's just call him that, whom I haven't heard from in 2 weeks. I know that because I recognized his handwriting, though what was weird is how it looked. It looked badly written and scratchy, and somewhat difficult to read, as if Paul was having a hard time writing it down and did it in a hurry. This is what he wrote. Brandon, I can't take it anymore. I have to get rid of this thing somehow before it was too late, and I was hoping you'd do it for me. I can't do it. He's after me, and if you don't destroy this CD, he'll come after you too. He's too fast for me. Please, Brandon, destroy this godforsaken disc before he comes after you too. It's too late for me. Destroy the disc, and you'll destroy him. But do it quick, otherwise he'll catch you. Don't even watch the episode. It's what he wants. Just destroy it. Please. Paul. Well, that was certainly weird. Even though Paul is my best friend. And I haven't seen him in 2 weeks. I didn't do what he asked me. I didn't think a simple TV show would do anything bad to him. After all, it's just a show, right? Boy, was I wrong about that. Anyway, I looked at the disc, and it looks like any other ordinary computer CD art disc. Except it had black marker written on it. SNEED.EXE! And it was much unlike Paul's handwriting, meaning that he must have got it from somewhere else, like a pawn shop or eBay. When I saw SNEED on the writing of the CD, I was actually excited and wanted to play it, since I am a big Simpsons fan, and I recognize SNEED as an obscure but memorable character. I went up to my room and I turned on my computer and put the disc in, and I clicked the MP4 file. When the title popped up and I noticed that it was for pre-HD Simpsons, I was like, awesome! Because like I said earlier, I like the classics. The first thing I noticed that was out of place was at the end of the couch gag, there was a split second where I saw the image turn into something much different. Something that I now consider horrifying before cutting to black. I remember what the image looked like in that split second before the show cut to black. Instead of the Simpsons' usual living room, there was SNEED's Feed and Seed, rusted and ruined. The SNEED's Feed and Seed sign was replaced with SNEED.EXE, and the sky had turned red, like blood, except it looked hyper-realistic. But the freakiest thing that was in that split-second frame was SNEED's partner, Chuck. His eyes were pitch black and bleeding, with 2 glowing red dots staring right at me. He frowned and crossed his arms at me. I was rather disturbed about that image when I saw it, though I figured that it was just an ionized particle causing yet another glitch on my computer and forgot about it. After it cut to black, it stayed like that for about 10 seconds or so, and then another weird thing happened. Instead of the episode continuing, another window popped up on my computer, and I was like, WTF? When would the episode continue? Anyway, then I noticed something off. My cursor wouldn't leave this new window, leaving me with 3 MP4 files. Eerie music was playing from my speakers despite only having this window open. And the preview image for the MP4 files where you see the preview of the video is just red static for all 3 files. What freaked me out more was the file names. It showed only SNEED, Chuck, and to my relief, Homer. Now I was sure something was up. I mean, what was this obsession with SNEED for crying out loud? That's when I realized this wasn't a glitch. It was a fan episode. Yeah, it definitely looked fan-made. It was really creepy, but as a smart viewer, I wasn't scared. Or at least, I tried not to be.
Audio Jungle.
And I told myself that it was just a fan episode, and there's nothing wrong with that. Anyways, shaking off the creeped out feeling, I picked SNEED.mp4, and when I selected and got started, the computer froze for about 5 seconds, and I heard a creepy voice saying, I can't SNEED! Before cutting to black. The screen stayed black for about 10 seconds or more. Then it showed the typical episode title thing, except the text were different shades of red, and the text showed E-I-E-I-DO. The screen faded. The screen faded in, and the episode's title vanished, revealing Homer driving up to Sneed's feed and seed from the same episode. Anyway, I started watching, and Homer got out of his car when he began to get heckled by the two farmers lounging at the store's entrance. Well, well, look at the city slicker pulling up in his fancy German car, Chuck mockingly called out while smoking his pipe. As any other Simpsons fan worth his salt, I knew this episode by heart, and I gleefully awaited Homer's pitiful attempt at a comeback. But instead he stopped, and he began to glare at the pair of troublemakers. Chuck, I think this guy's... Sneed attempted to speak before Homer snapped and grabbed him by the neck and began to strangle him like he did Bart in the early seasons. You listen to me and you listen good, you fucking hick! Homer began to scream, but it didn't even sound like Homer. It sounded like his voice actor wasn't even trying. He was too infuriated. I am a goddamn nuclear safety inspector. What the fuck have you done with your life? You shovel shit, get drunk, and wait for the dirt to do your job for you. You are nothing. I could have you killed, bury you next to the farm, and you be doing your job better than you are now. You will treat the important people with the respect they deserve, you fucking peasant. As Homer kept his disgusting rant going, I was becoming more and more scared and disturbed. Homer would never treat the common man that keeps our entire society functioning like this. The ranting went on, and gradually the life began to fade from Sneed's eyes, and his struggling began to wane. I wanted to do something, but it was just a TV show. Right? I tried moving my cursor to the close button on the window, but I noticed as I kept inching it closer, the three characters stopped what they were doing and started looking towards the camera. Out of fear, I quickly moved the mouse back, and the characters resumed their fight. Chuck was too stunned by what was going on to try and help his friend, and because of that, Sneed was killed right in front of him. Homer looked towards Chuck for what felt like minutes, then he backed up towards his car and drove away. The next screen stayed on Chuck crying over Sneed's corpse for the rest of the episode. It displayed the text, "I couldn't save him." I was so shocked by what had happened. Did Homer murder Sneed? No, he couldn't have. He and Sneed didn't even know each other, right? Why did Homer do that to him? I shook the shock off and closed the video, and I was left at the window with the MP4s. SNEED.MP4 was different. The video preview was the frame of Chuck crying over Sneed's corpse, but grayscale. Sneed looked different. His eyes were black and bleeding. His green shirt had gone black, and he had an expression of anguish on his face. Trying to ignore it, I opened Chuck.MP4 next. The voice came again, and the screen cut to black again, and stayed there for another 10 seconds. This time the title said, "Mr. Farmer is planning something." I was really freaked out by now. I couldn't tell if this was a glitch, or a fan episode, or some kind of sick, twisted joke, or anything really, but despite my fear of what happened next, I kept watching. The scene began at Sneed's feed and seed late at night. Chuck's eyes were bloodshot from crying, and he looked completely unkempt. The entire store was turned over, with counters and containers piled up to clear the center of the room. Lying on the floor was a sack with something shuffling around inside of it. Chuck kept mumbling something to himself under his breath. It was so quiet I had to strain my ears to make it out, but it sounded like he was saying, "Make him pay. Make him pay," over and over again. The sack was begging to be let go. "Come on, man. I didn't do anything to you. I don't even know who you are. I just want to go home, dude. My dad can give you what it..." "Your dad took everything from me, so I'm gonna take everything from him," Chuck screamed out. Did Chuck kidnap Bart to get revenge on Homer? WTF? It was scary to even think of what Chuck was about to do, so I tried to press the power button on my computer, to which Chuck audibly laughed. "You're gonna sit there and you're gonna watch, Brandon, or else you're next. Is somebody there? Help! Please help!" Chuck began to pummel the sack as audible crunching, squelching, and hyper-realistic screams were heard. I didn't get it. If this was a fan episode, how did Chuck know my name? This had to be some kind of a prank from Paul. If so, this is really unfunny. Blood began to pool from the sack, and Chuck collected it in some kind of vial. Meticulously, he began to spill the blood onto the floor in a pattern. At first I thought it was some kind of circle, but as Chuck kept making lines on the inside of the circle, I realized it was actually a pentagram! What the hell? Chuck placed candles at the intersection of each line and lit them. Then he put the sack at the center and loosened the rope, freeing Bart. Chuck gave Bart some kind of ceremonial dagger with a round blue hilt and a thick red blade. "You're gonna slit your wrist with this, or I'm gonna kill Lisa." Bart looked towards the exit of the store, then looked straight into the camera. "Please, you can still save us. Turn off the computer. You have to end this." With tears in his eyes, he took the knife to his wrist and began to cut them. Chuck had a pure evil grin on his face as Bart's blood contacted the pentagram. The entire thing began to glow as Bart burst into flames. To this day, I can't get over how realistic the sound of his skin cooking was, or his screams of agony. Chuck's eyes began to turn black as night, and his pupils turned crimson. He looked right at me and yelled out, "I can't Sneed!" Another text message appeared. "So many souls to fuck. So little suck. Wouldn't you agree?" What the hell? Just what is going on? Why was Chuck actually trying to talk to me through the show? But I was too scared to think of what he could want from me. The video closed and I was brought back to the MP4s, and this time the second file preview had Bart. His yellow skin had darkened to look like char, his eyes had no pupils, and he had a look of sadness on his face. I began to think those were the actual characters trapped in those video previews, but I couldn't believe it. I didn't want to believe it. So I took a nap, as a break from this madness. I wish I hadn't, because then I began to have the most disturbing nightmare. I was in pitch black darkness, though I was under the light given off by a lamp that hung above my head. I could hear the cries of Sneed and Bart nearby. They were saying stuff like, "Help us," and "Why did you give us to him?" and "Run away before he gets you too." Their cries died out as I then heard the voice, Chuck's voice, screaming out how he couldn't Sneed. "You're a lot of fun to play with, kid. Just like your friend Paul, though he didn't last long." I was scared and looking around for the source of the voice. "Won't be long until you join him and all my other friends." I saw him walking towards me, flickering in and out in several directions. "You can't run, kid. You're in my world now, just like the others." When he grabbed me, and I saw his bleeding black and red-eyed grinning face, I woke up with a fright. After a couple hours, I decided to continue watching the show. I don't know why, but I had to know. I had to figure out why this was happening. So I selected Homer.mp4 next. I still thought that this was wacky, this obsession with Sneed. But anyway, the episode title appeared again, and this time it said, "Chuck's Revenge," which I found really freaky. This time the episode began with the Simpsons' living room. Homer was pacing back and forth while Lisa and Marge tried to comfort him. "I'm sure he's alright, Dad. Bart always finds a way out of any trouble." "Lisa, honey, it's so unlike him to be gone for days at a time," Homer cried out. The entire family was distressed, and it made me feel horrible knowing what happened to Bart. As they wept, the lights in the house began to flicker for a moment before the power turned off. They collectively yelped in terror. "Stay here. I'm gonna go check the breaker box in the basement." The screen was pitch black, but from the sounds it seemed like Homer was stumbling his way towards the kitchen. I could hear him shuffle silverware around inside shelves until he howled out in pain. "Homie, what happened?" I scraped against a knife looking for the flashlight. "I'll be fine, Marge." With a clicking noise, there was finally a beam of light, and Homer opened the door to the basement. Instead of a stairwell, there was some dark, red hallway. "What the hell?" "Marge, I need you and the kids to stay where you are. Something's wrong." Homer ignored their protest as he walked down the hall, each step carrying an echoing, squishing noise. As soon as he was fully inside, the door slammed shut. When Homer looked back, the door was gone. No. This isn't happening. This isn't real. This is a nightmare. I'll wake up and Bart will be here. Homer wept into his hands for a few minutes, but with no other options, he kept going further into the hallway. A dim light came from seemingly nowhere, making the scene fully visible. The hall was pinkish and seemingly tube-shaped. The walls writhed as if Homer was seemingly inside something alive. Very faintly, a voice called out from the dark, "You did this." Homer's eyes widened, and he stepped up his pace, terrified of what was going on. "This isn't real. This isn't real. This isn't real. You did this." The voice was getting louder. Homer broke into a sprint. He was struggling to keep a quick pace given how fat he was, and he was gasping desperately for air, but the voice kept getting louder. You did this! You did this! You did this to me, Homer! Homer collapsed from exhaustion, panting and coughing up blood and bile. He couldn't breathe and was choking. Suddenly, Chuck popped right in front of Homer, and then red static appeared. The red static lasted for about 15 seconds, and then it showed me the most unpleasant image. The image showed a hyper-realistic picture of Chuck's decapitated head floating in the darkness, and when I say hyper-realistic, I mean he looked so real you could actually see the contours in his face, as if you could actually touch him through the screen. His face, oh god, he had the most horrifying smile I'd ever seen, and that's saying something considering I saw that image at the start of the game. His eyes are wide and black, and once again crying blood, which also looked hyper-realistic, and there was 2 small glowing red dots in those black eyes staring right at me, as if he was staring into my mind. His grin was wide and demonic. It literally stretched to the sides of his face. He had stains of blood and small bits of flesh on his lips, as if he ate something alive. I stared at that gruesome image for a good 30 seconds, never taking my eyes off it. I felt as if he was actually looking at me, smiling at me. That face, it just took 10 seconds for it to etch itself into my brain for good. Then the screen flickered with red static again 3 times, and on the 3rd time, I heard, "I can't SNEED!" Except this time it sounded distorted, demonic even. It went back to the image again, except this time there was text. It was messed up, but it was pretty much one of the most horrifying things I had looked at since I've seen this show. "I can't SNEED!" It was when I read that message while looking at Chuck, when it hit me, I realized right there and then, this Chuck was a monster, a pure evil, sadistic, all-powerful, nightmarish, demented monster, and all of his victims, including Sneed, Bart, Homer, and possibly Paul, are just his little toys. And the game is the very gateway into his chaotic, nightmarish fucking suck shop. and the very hell his victims are trapped in. Suddenly, in an actual split second, I screamed as Chuck lunged at the screen, screeching loudly with his mouth wide open to an unnatural length, revealing nothing but a literal spiraling abyss of pure darkness. Then it stopped and showed nothing but a black screen. As I sat there, staring at the black screen, one last text came up. "Ready for round 2, Brandon?" The voice said, "I can't SNEED!" Now sounding more clear as if Chuck was right behind me. Played again 3 times as I looked at that text in shock and confusion. Then I got booted back to the window, and this time Homer.mp4 had a preview image of Homer in the same tormented state as Sneed and Bart. Homer's skin turning a shade of blue, his beard had been shaved, his eyes were gouged out and blood was coming from them, and he had a mere death-like expression on his face. I looked at Sneed, Bart, and Homer, and I cried a bit. I pitied them for the agony they're going through. They were forever trapped within the game, forever tormented by that furious farmer, and always will be. Then the computer shut itself off, and I couldn't turn it back on no matter what I did. I sat there for maybe 25 seconds, horrified of what just happened. Chuck is the very embodiment of fucking suck. He tortures people who watch his episode in more ways than one, and then when he gets bored, he drags you into the show, literally drags you to hell, where he can play with you always, as his toy. I can't get the disc out of my computer. I think it's stuck in there, but at least I managed to turn it back on now. After I sat there for 25 seconds, I heard a voice right behind me, like a whisper. "Chuck sells fuck and suck!" I turned around to see where the voice came from, and what I saw made me scream. Sitting on my bed was a pamphlet for a store called Floyd's Feed and Seed.